Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the New Thought Media Network Science of Mind lecture series. My name is Reverend Victoria Bomberry. I'm the Minister of Transformation at the Riverside Center for Spiritual Living in Southern California. I want to thank all of the lecture series team who have done the past 5 lectures of the series. Reverend Robert Brzezinski, practitioner Tracy Brown, Reverend Elzia Siku, and Ray Cheryl McCreary have laid set the stage for our exploration into this next chapter. And these first several chapters of the Science of Mind textbook are what we generally call back to basics, right? It's the foundational thinking of Ernest Holmes and how he enters into a dialogue with philosophical systems and religious systems over the ages. So this is a really powerful exploration on so many levels, because there's the chapters seem short, right? They are only a few pages long, but they are jam-packed with the thought of the ages. And, as I go through this, I'm wanting to know, what was Ernest Holmes reading? What was he thinking about? And what was he engaging with that helped him outline science of mind and spirit in the way that he did. And before we get started, I just want us to come together and in prayer and prepare ourselves for this wonderful, wonderful adventure in mind. So let's turn within. And coming together in consciousness, I am just so grateful to recognize God as the ground of all being, that consciousness, that oneness that I am a part of, and that each and every person that hears this broadcast is a part of, and even those who are not listening are a part of this. We are all one. We are all one in consciousness. And I am grateful to know this in my very being. And I'm blessing this broadcast today, knowing that we are open to the ideas, that we are opening our hearts. We are removing any kind of clutter or preconceived notions that we might have, and just starting with a beginner's mind, ready to avail ourselves of this incredible philosophy and this incredible exploration of reality. And I am blessing us, and I'm blessing all of the team here this morning that is supporting this broadcast, and I'm blessing everyone who is hearing this broadcast today. And I allow all this good just to flow freely, knowing that it is done already in the mind of God. And so it is. So I just want to recap last week very quickly. Last Saturday, Rochelle McCrary covered the first chapter of part 1 in the textbook, In the Beginning, God. And this is where we start. That's where we always start, in the beginning, God. And I love that exclamation point at the end of that title. And we call, God the first cause. And that's one of the names that Ernest Holmes uses. And that's one of the names that's used in theology across Christian theology. And I also believe that, that first cause or source is a part of Eastern philosophy too. So we have this beginning, and we're calling it God. And in that chapter, Rochelle laid out all of those big questions that humanity has had since time immemorial. We can imagine Oh, the first humans just laying out under the stars and looking up and wondering, my goodness, what is this all about? Who made me? What is this thing that we're in? So those are huge questions. How does it work? You know, all of these things. What is the world made of? How did we come into being? All these big questions that we've engaged in over the millennia. And Holmes refers to the Genesis story to set the stage for an exploration of these questions. And, in the West, probably the Genesis story is the most well known creation story. There's thousands of creation stories, and each culture has a creation story. And, as I've looked at mythology and those creation stories, the literature of people, whether oral or written, there is something in those creation stories from each culture that alludes to consciousness and an evolution of consciousness that's taking place. And that's very interesting. We know the Genesis story, and we use that as a way of bringing everyone into looking at these ideas. And in the Genesis story, the word of spirit manifested all of creation. So that's what happened. That was the manifestation of all of creation. The word is the concept, the idea, or the image, or the thought of God. So already we're setting in motion that idea of thought. Holmes asserts that spirit continues to make forms forever. So creation is ongoing. We're here right now, but this is not the end. Creation is ongoing. There's new forms being created all the time. And that is where we are in all of creation, in this infinite universe, infinite substance and infinite form. And these forms all come into existence in accordance with the law. And, I love the reminder that Holmes gives us that creation is always beginning and never ending. That just warms my heart to think of that, that life goes on. Life is continuous, and we are a part of that, always and forever. So this week, we're going to look at chapter 2, Mind, the Greatest Discovery. And this begins on page 71 of the textbook. I've got my old trusty textbook here, and it begins on page 71. And I just want to contextualize a little bit the time in which this was written. And it was written in the early 20th century. So this is almost 100 years ago, right, that we have this edition of the textbook. And what was going on then? Well, for one thing, the way that people talked was different. The word usage was different. So when I refer to the textbook, I will often change the words to be more inclusive. So if there's a time when I forget to do that, forgive me for that. I firmly believe that Ernest Holmes would be in favor of that, because he was all about making this available to everyone, and he was all about inclusivity as well. So In the early 20th century, like I said, everything was gendered male, and anything that was universal, the universal was gendered male. And of course, we know that the universal really has no gender. We can't even describe it in those terms, really. But that was common usage. And today it's not. And sometimes the style of the textbook can be kind of off-putting. But we have to remember, for his time, Ernest Holmes was trying to make these ideas accessible to a popular audience. And he simplified and synthesized so that people could more easily understand the concepts. And think about this. We're just setting the tone for what was going on then, and you're going to see some reverberations today from that era. So in 1859, Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species was published. And by the beginning of the 20th century, evolution was gaining wider currency. So that idea, evolution was not, it hasn't been, as a concept, it hasn't been with us all that long. So at the beginning of the 20th century, when Ernest Holmes is starting to talk about evolution in his writings and tying it to spirituality, that was groundbreaking. That was a groundbreaking turn that he's made. And some of you may remember that there is a famous court trial that took place in 1925, and it was the state of Tennessee versus John Thomas Scopes. And it's commonly referred to as the Scopes monkey trial. And it largely took place to kind of publicize this controversy that was taking place in American theology. And it publicized the fundamentalist modernist controversy, in which the modernists did not see any inconsistency with science and religion, while fundamentalists said the Word of God in the Bible took priority over all human knowledge. So the Word of God, in this instance, refers to the infallibility of the Bible, that everything that is written in the Bible is taken at its face value or taken literally. So this is the milieu in which Ernest Holmes was writing. So to bring this together was very interesting. And instead of pitting science and religion against one another, he kind of takes another route, right? The modernists were saying, okay, there's no contradiction here. We don't really, religion can hold science as well. And in some ways, he was in that same stream of thought. But I think that there was a different intentionality involved. And the way that he put it together, he wanted us to understand the basic philosophical questions of humanity, and also knowing, and philosophy kind of branched into science, and that's science, that's the study of reality. So that's science. So that's the impetus, our early foray into science begins with philosophy, I believe. And for him, spirit is never cut off from the inquiries that he makes. So some of the philosophers, in the Age of Reason, there's that idea of reason only to come to conclusions. But for Ernest Holmes, he never makes those kinds of that kind of break. So in a sense, as the great synthesizer, he's bringing all of these ideas together. So, and I'll give an example. He uses the concept of evolution to talk about the evolution of humanity in both form, right? We've changed our form and spirit. So maybe outwardly our looks may be the same, but we've had all of these different kinds of evolutionary steps that have been taking place within our bodies. That's just a part of our existence. But he also applied that to spirit. There's an evolution of spirit. And we also have to remember that at the end of the 19th century, that's not that long ago, was the birth of psychology, our modern psychology. Psychology, I think the earliest healers had a keen awareness of the psychology of their moment. And that was used for healing, healing purposes. But for modern psychology, it took place in the 19th century, which isn't that long ago at all. And in the early 20th century, we saw a breakthrough in quantum physics, right? There was this big breakthrough, and people started moving away from a pure Newtonian physics into quantum physics. So this is kind of the milieu that Holmes is working in, and he's bringing all of these things together in a coherent form, and he's engaging with it, right? And he's inviting us to engage with all of these ideas too. So we're really, at play. I love that idea of being at play in the fields of the Lord, right? And here we are. We're at play in the fields of the Lord with all of these ideas and concepts that we are looking at today. And Holmes writes, life waits upon humanity's discovery of natural laws, its discovery of itself, and its discovery of its relationship to the great whole. Oh, wow. Life. Life waits for that. Life is there, and we are here to explore and discover it. Holmes saw the principles of science as invisible, theoretical, like our idea of spirit, right? And the invisible world can only be experienced as effects. So, when we talk about, you're familiar with this language, right? The world of effects. You're familiar with that. So we're kind of digging down deep in here to see how he arrived at using this kind of language. So, of course, we can't see God. We can only see the effects of God. We can't see beauty. We only see the representations of beauty. So we have this whole entrance into, what is this thing? This reality. What is this reality? What is spirit that we are looking at? So, according to Holmes, the first great discovery was that human beings can think. And Holmes, when he says, when he talks about this, he is referring to Descartes. So the great philosopher Descartes from the 17th century, who said, "I think, therefore I am." And this was the one thing that Rene Descartes established as a certainty, that because he was able to think, he existed. And what's interesting, looking at Descartes, is he really emphasized the ways that we can be deceived by our senses, right? What we see, hear, touch, feel, all of that kind of thing. We can be deceived by that. And he finally arrived at because they can, there can be optical illusions. We can hear things that aren't really there. There's all kinds of ways that deception can occur, but where there is a certainty is that ability to think. So we can have a lot of false beliefs. I think this is a really important point, that we can have a lot of false beliefs about reality if we're only relying on how we are sensing what we are experiencing. And he establishes human beings as thinking subjects. And don't confuse this with the way that Ernest Holmes uses subject. In Holmes's thought, he means subject to. In Western philosophy, a thinking subject has agency. So they're slightly different. So we're using different kinds of language to describe different things here. So as Ernest Holmes is talking about the subjective, he is talking about that which is subject to spirit, right? So that's what he's talking about. When Descartes is establishing this thinking subject, he's talking about our ability to think and have agency. And, Ernest Holmes says that mind is the most important discovery because as we store all of our thought as memory, there is the possibility that many false beliefs become a part of our unconscious. So in this kind of deception that takes place, there are a lot of things that become stored. Thought is not, memory was once a thought, right? And now it's stored. It's not that living thought that is in the moment. It is something that is stored in the subconscious. So we can have many false beliefs that become a part of us that we may not be aware of. And so the most important discovery, and this is what we always hear in Ernest Holmes, is that we can change our thought. And by changing our thought, we can remold our affairs. And by right thinking, we can bring new conditions into our lives. So you probably all have a lot of examples of this. And I have a favorite example from a movie. And this movie had a big impact on me because it was about thinking, and it was about memory, and it was about false belief and how it plays out in the life of this man. And it's a movie, an Australian movie from I think in the early 1990s, called Proof. And the story concerns the tribulations of Martin, who is a photographer, and he's blind. So he takes all of these photographs as a way of understanding the reality around him. He doesn't have sight, but he has this camera that can mediate that reality. And yet he also has to have someone who interprets and talks to him about the pictures that he's taken. So all of this comes to him with difficulties he has with, with his idea of his mother and whether his mother is trustworthy or not, because she tells him about, she's describing the garden outside his bedroom window, and she tells him that somebody's raking leaves, but he can't hear the sound of this person raking leaves. So here's where the deception comes in. He can't hear the sound. His mother's describing this. So he establishes this distrust of her, and he believes that she's lying. And that idea of lying just infects his whole relationship with his mother. And as an adult, this is stored in his mind. It's more explicit with Martin in a lot of ways, because he has this memory that's stored and it's operative in everything that he does. And finally, through a friendship that develops, he is able to come to terms with this whole idea that he was wrong, because he has a picture of this particular day, this particular event that has happened, and his friend describes it to him. And he says, there is a man raking leaves in the garden. And all at once, all of these things that he set up, the distrust in his life, the way that he's manipulated his reality, it just all comes tumbling down in this realization that this memory, this thought that he has, is wrong. It was a deception on his part. So that's where the false belief can come in. So we just want to keep in mind that we can change this. We can be aware of who we are and what we're doing. So I highly recommend this movie to everybody. I always say every practitioner and every minister should see this movie to really see how this operates, how we can get into these kinds of ideas. So in religious science, the concept of I am resonates profoundly because it's equated with the recognition of the one God that is revealed to Moses in the Bible. There's no way that Moses can look at God, nor can any name describe God. And God says, I am that I am. And this ancient biblical wisdom is further explored by Kant, who looked at the phenomenon or appearances, which are our experience, and the noumena are the presumed things themselves, which constitute reality. So the reality is posited as something that we really are trying to apprehend. We're trying to understand what reality is. And here we are looking at our experience. So remember, there's all these things that can come in between that, and we can be deceived by different things, right? And we are constantly in search of that which constitutes reality. So it's a great exploration. It's nothing to be fearful about. It's just that whole idea that, oh, yes, we have this opportunity to learn more about that real. And it's the thing itself. This is what Ernest Holmes always says, the thing itself. And this comes from philosophy. And Kant uses this. The thing itself is independent of our experience of it. So there is this enormous reality out there that is independent of our experience of it, because we just can't apprehend it. We can't understand it. And we're ignorant of this noumenal realm. So like I said, this is such a rich chapter, and, I could probably talk for 2 hours just on this chapter. But I wanted us to really hone in on this idea of um, being these thinking subjects. Also, we are spirit, and how Ernest Holmes brings those together in a way that we can understand it very easily, and that we can know that because we think, we are able to change our thinking and change our lives. And that's what Ernest Holmes set forward for us. We can change our thinking and we can change our lives. And, that's not devoid of all the other things, psychology, um, how we are in the world, and changing the conditions of our of lives as a collectivity. But Ernest Holmes is really looking at the individual, and that individual power to change. And, this is the whole idea of that individuation of the person, the soul, the psychology. I mean, it encompasses everything. It's the whole. So there's a totality. There's this, I'll use maybe a popular term, unified field in which Ernest Holmes is operating. And Ernest Holmes has this one quote, and I'm going to stop here because I know that I'm getting close to the end of the time. But here we are, and I think this is one of the most important paragraphs in this chapter, because we finally get a sense of something that I think falls by the wayside often, especially in our modern lives. And he says, as a result of the discovery that humans could think, plan, execute, humanity has built up a great civilization. It has perceived that nature works through human beings in order to work for them. That's important. That's an important concept. Humanity has harnessed electricity. Electricity has always been here, right? But until human beings could understand how to work with it, how to harness it, it was in the noumena. And he goes on to say, human beings have compelled steam to do its biddings, conquered the air, built cities, made the desert to bloom, and has thrown the lines of commerce around the globe. Indeed, humanity has seemed to possess the earth during this process, even though little attention has been given to that still small voice which said, "Man, know thyself." And that's the end of the quote. Of course, know thyself is an ancient Greek aphorism, and it's the first of 3 Delphic maxims inscribed on the temple of Apollo at Delphi. The other 2 were nothing to excess and surety brings ruin. So he's focusing on that one. Man, know thyself. And I'm underscoring this paragraph to call attention to the necessity of human knowledge and spirit working in tandem to ensure a good life for not only humanity, but for the entire planet. As I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, he was writing at a time when there was extreme tension between Christian fundamentalism and modernist views of science and human knowledge. And instead of taking one side or the other in this debate, Holmes is calling attention to the necessity of the 2 working hand in hand. So I would say, at first glance, it may appear laudatory And it is to a certain degree that human beings have accomplished all these things. But there is a caveat at the end. Know thyself. And what does it mean to know thyself? For me, this goes directly to the heart of our spiritual teachings. What do I know about this individuating self? And I know that I'm still a work in progress. What do I truly know about being a human being and a spiritual being? There's no difference between those two. One is form, one is, the actual substance. So there's no difference between those two. The human was an idea in the mind of God that was manifested perfectly, if not yet fully evolved to its perfection. It is the work of individuals to do the spiritual work necessary to participate in the evolution of the human soul on the upward spiral journey that we are each on. As individuals know themselves, they add to our common evolutionary path. To know myself means that I engage in spiritual practice so that I can hear the still small voice, which is the authentic self. In other words, spirit. That's that noumena, and that noumena is in us. The word that was spoken into being as me, a unique emanation of the divine. Ernest Holmes seems to suggest that even though humanity seems to possess the earth, there's work to be done if we're to create the world we are meant to live in. The divine idea is yet to be realized at our current stage of development. And to me, that's exciting, that we have this work that we are engaged in, and that we do have, and we are empowered to do it because we are thinking subjects and we are spirit. And he reminds us that spirit is the power that knows itself. And that's where we're evolving towards, knowing ourselves fully, coming into that deep realization of who we are. So I'm going to stop here and ask if there's any questions, and I will wait here. Oh, where do we get mental impressions? Okay, that's a question that has come up. Okay, so this is the next section. I didn't cover this, so that's a great question that you've asked. So if we look at these mental impressions, right, we can think about, we get our mental impressions in reality, according to Ernest Holmes, from the universal mind. So that is, that's where they come from. It's not something that we recognize one another because of that divine within. So when we talk about the one mind is the mind of God. That's where we get our mental impressions, from the mind of God. So we're talking about that absolute in this instance. And I hope that's clear. It's not something that's coming from our senses, just purely from this. I hate using the idea of mechanical, but maybe that's the one that works here. The mechanical, our sight, sound, and all of that. And from what I described about the movie, those things can often not be the entire picture. Our reality is often very partial, individual reality. And that's what makes coming together in community such a wonderful thing. We all bring our particular vantage point and take on things, and we're putting together a whole picture of what we know. And that's also what we're doing by looking at all these philosophers and how Ernest Holmes was engaging with them and developing this. So our mental impressions come from the mind of God. That's how we recognize one another. And we're getting better at it, I believe. We're getting better at recognizing that God within each one of us. Are there any more questions? So I can talk a little bit longer, and Reverend Robert, if you want to give me a clue here about the time, that will be great. And I'm going to just remind people that this is brought to you by the New Thought Media Network, and it relies on your donations. So there is a ribbon running down at the bottom of your screen that says, please donate. And, you can support this. And it's, I think this is a wonderful thing that we're doing here, coming together on a Saturday morning, really thinking deeply about Ernest Holmes and uncovering what our philosophy and our way of understanding the world works. And Ernest Holmes told us, you know, don't take my word for it. Try it. See what happens. And I think all of us who have tried it and see what happens, we've had some good results. We can stand here and be calm in the eye of the storm, be joyful. Even when there's sorrow, we find that joy in it, in life, in this thing itself, knowing these eternal truths, knowing that there is something that is ongoing, always, that creation is always in process, and that we are a part of it and will always be a part of it. It's just the way it is. Things change, things come into being, and here we are. And we have a question: how can we develop our minds to be in tune with God? I talked about our spiritual practices, and we talk about it all the time, and everybody hears it all the time. Your spiritual practices. We do have what we call spiritual mind treatment, which is a 5-step process of affirmative prayer. That is a spiritual process in which we go through these 5 steps to align ourselves with spirit, to be in tune, to get to that noumena, to that real world where perfection is all there is. So that is one way that we can align ourselves with God, by the practice of our affirmative prayer. And, I think this is a powerful, powerful technology that we have within Science of Mind. We have this ability to go within, go through these 5 steps, and they can seem like they're rote steps as you're learning it. But as you embody it, you can come to that place where what you are realizing is is placed in that fertile ground, and it can manifest. So we know that it's all good. God is all good, and we align with that. We can also do our meditation. And, I'm a big proponent of meditation. And in effect, our 5-step process has an element of meditation in it, in terms of going within, coming to that still place within, and moving forward to this next realm where all is well. So meditation And meditation, we have a course that we teach called self-mastery. And, I think that meditation is a real good tool for developing self-mastery, uh, because we realize that, we do have have the ability to see thinking for what it is, right? To see the thoughts that can that are there, um, and how they can work for us, or maybe those that are not as healthy for us. And we are able within meditation to learn to let go of those thoughts that are not serving us. Meditation really is a good training ground for that. And there's no fear in it. There's no fear at all in meditation when when thoughts come, because we are thinking beings, right? And that's what we do. We think. So thinking is taking place. I often wonder, what was my first thought this morning? And that's a huge question, because I have no idea. I don't know what I thought, when I first woke up. And at the same time, I was in a dream state, so there were thoughts in that dream state as well. A different kind of consciousness, but conscious state, I'll say, but thoughts nonetheless. So here we are. We can have that alignment through prayer with meditation. Some people have wonderful, wonderful um, experiences with journaling. And, I love journaling myself. I don't call it journaling. Somehow journaling just turned me off for years and years, and until I could call it my personal writing. And when I started doing that, there was something that just came through, and that person was this Reverend Victoria, or Victoria, uh, and it was also tapping into something that was that authentic self. So that personal writing became much bigger than just the the ego ramblings, or and oftentimes ego garbage that was coming out, what I thought would come out in a journal. So anyway, that's a great, great tool, and I'm making fun of myself and laughing about it, because what do we do in this? This is a wonderful journey. It's a happy journey. It's a joyful journey, in the midst of whatever is going on in the outside world. We come to that place of peace. That's where we align. We have all of these spiritual tools to use. And I've named a few. I think the simplest things are spiritual practice. I really do. When we are aware of this beautiful gift that life is, we come to that point where we are in we are aligned with God. We are attuned with God. Some of you have gratitude practices. That is an incredible practice to have, to just be grateful. Be grateful. To get up in the morning, and some people say, oh, well, that sounds really so simple and sounds kind of hokey or whatever, but we've kind of gotten out of the habit of even saying grace at the table, right? Giving thanks. And that's kind of a universal thing, that people will do something that acknowledges that food on the table, that food that we take in, that nourishes our bodies. And you might want to try saying grace at times, or just pausing and giving thanks for the nourishment that you receive. So gratitude is another way. Oh, and Chris says, thank you for the movie recommendation. Yes, I'd love to hear what you have to think about it. Uh, uh, it's I found it really a beautiful, beautiful movie. And thank you, Sherry. Good to see you, Sherry. Thank you for being here. So do we have any more questions? Well, I'm just going to mention the philosophers that Ernest Holmes cites in this chapter. I think it makes it much more uh, impressive, I guess. Impressive, and it kind of fills things out to get a sense of what we've been thinking about as human beings in Western philosophy. And of course, Ernest Holmes uh, explored Eastern philosophy too, and Eastern religions. So there is this coming together of all this thought within the philosophy of the science of mind, and um, and sometimes we lose track of, well, where are all these ideas coming from? Of course, they're coming from the one mind, and and we can, as we go through this series, we're going to outline uh, more of this in more detail. But think about uh, all of this knowledge and moving toward wisdom that we are engaged in. And to me, looking at all of these philosophers is interesting, to get the context of where we were, in the beginning of our thought, and where we are now, and how we're understanding things, and how we are moving into this era of I think increased wonder. I think there was a time when uh, we were in a different world, a world that was kind of black and white. And now we're coming back into color, into that knowledge of what reality really is. And, I'm excited to know what it will really be like. What is that reality? What is it? What is reality? And I'm in awe. So there's not much more I can say. And next week, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that next week it will be Reverend Elzia on the next chapter. Thank you, and we'll see you soon next week.